The first defendant did not have any previous convictions, but he was known to the police and had been carrying knives. But that has to be considered in the context that he was the victim of trafficking and extremely vulnerable. I have taken into account everything I know about the first defendant and what he did, and in my judgment the minimum time he should spend in custody is 8 years 6 months. From that must be deducted the 315 days that he's already spent in custody. The first defendant will remain on licence for the rest of his life. This means that there are conditions that will be decided when the parole board decide it's appropriate for him to leave custody, and he will have to follow those conditions for the rest of his life, and if he does not do so, then he may have to go back to custody. I now turn to the second defendant. The second defendant was much closer to 12 in age than 13 at the date of these offences. The pre-sentence report for the second defendant has been prepared by the 2 social workers who were allocated to work with him from when he was remanded in a secure unit in November last year. It is dated July 2024 and is a detailed and comprehensive report, which has also gathered information about the second defendant from all relevant sources, both in terms of documents and speaking to the relevant people, including the second defendant. I have read all this report with care and taken all that it says into account. The report explains in detail the second defendant's background and upbringing, the upheaval caused to his childhood by moves in the location of his family's home, some of which was spent in a refuge, and the disruption this caused to his childhood. The starting point of 13 years needs to be adjusted downwards because the second defendant's chronological age was that he'd relatively recently turned 12 at the date of the offence. His emotional maturity and development age was not below his chronological age. He does not have any mental health problems but may have dyslexia. I then have to take into account that he's now showing maturity beyond his years. He is responding very well in custody. He was of good character and has shown remorse for what has happened. I have taken into account everything I know about the second defendant and what he did, and in my judgment, the minimum time he should spend in custody is 8 years 6 months. From that must be deducted the 315 days that he has already spent in custody. I appreciate that this is the very same as for the first defendant, but having applied the guideline, the factors that have led me there are different. But when I have considered and balanced the individual features of each defendant, that is the clear conclusion that I have reached for each of them. The second defendant will also remain on licence for the rest of his life. This means that there will be conditions decided when he leaves custody which he will have to follow for the rest of his life. If he breaks those conditions, then he may have to return to custody. I order no separate penalty for the first defendant on count 2, possession of a bladed article in a public place. I order no separate penalty for the second defendant on count 2. I order forfeiture and destruction of the machete. I make no order for costs and no order for compensation. The victim surcharge applies. Finally, I would like to extend the court's condolences to Shawn Seesahai's family and to thank them for the dignified way in which they have conducted themselves during this trial. I'd also like to thank the police, all counsel, the intermediaries and all the court staff involved. That concludes these sentencing remarks.